But with a bit of cleaning and a futon, it could be a decent living place. So we are back at the prefab. Um, you know what? I have the option to talk to Kiyonosuke, um, and I think I'm gonna do that since this is where we left off last time. So, yeah, here we go. At that moment, my head was flooded with information. It felt like my mind was crushed by a million sheep. Why did I forget? Did my memories carry over in a weird way? I had tons of things to think about. About the beast in the village, the giant monster, the dream. But this wasn't the time to worry about that. I went back to Nosato Mansion. Excuse me. Doorbell. Excuse me. Doorbell, doorbell, doorbell. In the jungle of the decent void, the Buddha's corpse shouts out, Ra? Who's singing the Buddha's ash rock while hammering my doorbell? Me. You? Have you gone mad? What's wrong with you? You were a normal youth until just a moment ago. I'm perfectly sane, and you know the song? What about it? I simply remember hearing it at a store. Huh. So you don't know the high jazz flavor? Well, I do. I knew it. Personally, I like more Raimon. What a minor. Haija Black Dog Zia is the way to go, starting with part 3. Oh. I really love the part where 5 black Dogzias gathered and became the Black Dogizarian. You're an otaku, huh? So are you. Wait, this isn't the time to bond over minor flash movies. You don't have any other business with me, do you? I'm busy here. I have something to tell you. I believe you are the someone who would understand. What is it? I will say something absurd now. You might even doubt my sanity. Well, I'm not saying that you can't differentiate reality and fiction. In fact, you can probably do it better than the average person. However, I do believe you have a decent ability to suspend your disbelief. Wait, what are you getting at? Do you know that movie where someone is repeating the day before the school culture festival over and over again? Oh, that one? It's a classic. Sure, I know it. What about it? Something similar is happening to me right now. Wait. Mist will rise from Samananaga in just a few hours. The feast of the Yomi Purge will begin and many will die. What? What are you... Wait. Why do you know that term? You will die too. Answer my question. Stop saying ridiculous things. I understand if you don't believe me. I've repeated these days few dozen times now, and with every death I loop back to square one. That's why I know a lot about Yasumizu, including things that no newcomer should know. You are a doctor of medicine, graduated from university. Chikamochi Kochima is your nephew, and you have feelings for Reikako. However, I'm sure that that's not enough. I could have easily looked that up myself, and what more, I didn't come here to save you. It's likely you'll die this time too. But I would like you to ask you some things, so I can prevent the feast from happening in another timeline. Are you, are you serious? Yes. Why come to me? Through the many feasts I've been in, I've come to understand what kind of person you are, your nature, basically. And I believe that you are the person who can understand things if they are explained properly. Come in. There. He led me into the well-furnished reception room. The inside was as fancy as the outside. The village head had to be a really wealthy bunch. Is it that curious? He returned from the kitchen carrying a set of black tea. Sorry for staring. I think it's outdated too. Don't worry, have some tea. Oh no need to fuss over me. I'm of poor upbringing, so do tell me if I'm not drinking right or something. I won't mind if you drink how you want. Thank you. Now, was this room prepared by the head of the family from 3 generations ago, your great-grandfather? Where did you hear about him? Even you are a, how do I put it, a looper. I do not believe a Nosato would tell you about the stain on the family name. Did another village head tell you about it? I don't know what he'd want, but he must have some sort of swindler. It was you. What? I heard it from you. When your and Chikamochi Kamoto Shidama-kun's relationship became worse, you told him this. You are as much of a madman as your great-great-grandfather. He closed his eyes, groaned, then lay back on the sofa. I invited you inside out of mere curiosity. But if you know that much, I might even believe you. I need you to, though I don't have anything I would call evidence. Instead, I will tell you of the loops I experience. It will probably make it seem even more absurd, but I still want you to believe it. Enough with the build-up. Get to it. I drank the fragrant tea and spoke. About the time Yasunaka-kun Orobi won as wolf. About the time Chimi tried to kill everyone, and the time she failed. And even how at the end of Kiyonosuke she had some reason killed Rikeko-san, and then I killed him. Finally, I told him about the time I became a wolf and sacrificed my companions to win. Though I kept quiet about the sheep and the giant monster for now. It's hard to think that he was the main culprit behind the loop, but there was no guarantee it wouldn't leak out somehow. Thus, I only told him that I was hanged because Mimiya-san the flashlight. I also mentioned that Kiyonosuke she died too, and that I heard of the thing about his great-grandfather then. After about an hour, he talked. He stood up to get more tea. He poured it in, and I gladly drank it. Unlike before, it was herb tea. Tired from talking, I let the pleasant scent of the tea wash away my fatigue. He was hanging his head, looking down at the tea leaves floating in his tea. He then took the cup and drank some of it and looked at me. You're right, that does sound absurd. However, it does seem like something that can happen in this absurd place. You believe me. I'll simply say I'm more interested in this than ever, but the more I listen, the more I wonder. What do you want of me? If you have seen so many feasts, surely you know by now. I'm not the man who can do much in a dire situation. I'll start with something seemingly unrelated, but I don't quite understand that opinion of yours. At first, I thought you were just an ignorant, haughty person. Then I thought you were just a village head. I would say that you are just a bit uncomfortable with your hometown, and that you actually have good discretion and talent. You do absurd things sometimes, but I do believe you look at your decisions from a third-person perspective. That makes me feel like you're hiding your true abilities. I honestly am nearly completely sure that the head families are involved in the feast. That's why I believe you might know something, but you are hiding it. That's why I want you to tell me what you know about Yasumizu and Fujiyoshi's secrets. Though as I mentioned before, there might be more delicate matters here, like the Usumatsu family. Even so, I want to hear everything. I'm bad at talking and leading simply because I am that kind of person. As you know, the current head of the family is my older brother. He's a great man of character with immense intelligence and charisma. I've been in his shadow ever since I was young. Whenever I said or did whatever I wanted, he would spin it in a way that was good for me. Because everything went so well with him, I began to believe I was blessed with great talent. I realized how mediocre I really was. By the time I turned 20, I realized I was bad at reasoning and generally a nuisance. That's why I left this village, though I couldn't find a place for myself outside either. The only place where I felt comfortable was the Sci-Fi Research Society. It was basically a hangout for grotty people like myself. Even so, most of them were smart, and even the president, despite his many repeated years, had excellent leadership skills. I became the vice president, and whenever I said anything too apprehensive or speculative or scathing, he would turn it around for me. I know full well that I can't lead. I imagine that the me you know merely tried to be useful to Sir Makishima and Yasunaga, Orobi-kun, or Moro. I probably couldn't abandon my pride. Even in that situation, a village head like me has to take charge, or whatnot. That's so unreasonable. I truly am a problematic person. Please don't be so hard on yourself. I can see pretty clear that you're a level-headed person. That's only because you said things so austere that I felt like opening up to you. Remember how I was before. Let you inside. Well, even if you're a liar and everything you said was made up, I'd consider this worth it for the moment of introspection. At least as long as you don't tell me to pay your intuition or something. My heart ached a bit. I won't say that, of course, but I was exposing the current him to danger. Now back to the topic, what you wanted to hear. Unfortunately, the family isn't that interested in me. You mean that, yes, though I do know the basics of what a village head should know, I know absolutely nothing about what they do behind the scenes, though. Do you know about the older hostilities between Yasumizu and Fujiyoshi? No, please tell me. Unfortunately, barely anyone knew about the village and the feast, or rather, they all converge upon a certain old story. It was a minor bit of knowledge Kiyonosuke knew as a village head. He said that Yasumizu had once rebelled against Fujiyoshi. They didn't know what prompted it, but apparently it had something to do with the water used for growing crops. In a way, the people of Yasumizu invaded Fujiyoshi at night and stole and beat and killed people. They were all covered in Saranaga mud to keep from being identified. Fujiyoshi inhabitants greatly feared their appearance. Thus, after the rebellion, they decided to make things even worse for Yasumizu, and the inhabitants effectively strangled themselves, apparently. I believe the thing about Yasunaga's mud is tied to Fujiyoshi's unique perspective on life and death, primarily the Yomi. So did the mud and the rebellion make Fujiyoshi believe that the people of Yasumizu were Yobito? That's not out of the question, but not certain either. Yasumizu and Fujiyoshi had already been segregated, and it wasn't unlikely that there could be a rebellion. It was likely that the idea to cover themselves in mud was linked to the legend that Saranaga was Yomi and intended to frighten people. I see, so how should we look at this event? For one, it was the reason for Shinai's festival, the mountain festival that is still held today. They have a tradition to hold a parade of wolves and symbolize the subduement and bringing down the people of Yasumizu. Have you seen the cloth masks they wear while farming? Yes, it's so that the people of Yasumizu don't look into the eyes of the Yomibito. It's the other way around. It's so that the people of Kami Fujiyoshi wouldn't have to look into the eyes of the people of Yasumizu, who may or may not be Yomibito. These old, reasonable superstitions are still alive because they crossed the line once. That's what the village head believes. Saying it out loud, I realize how truly awful it is. Why is such a festival and tradition still alive to this day? That festival might actually be important for Yasumizu. Do you know why? I don't. The wolf parade passes all the Okiba in Yasumizu, splashes water on the residents, and meet the village representative in the hall. Taysan. The wolves would offer something to the representative, and after thanking them for the festival's success, give them lots of money and other goods. So they isolate Yasumizu economically, only pamper the place during these festivals. Exactly, you might say that this is just another way Kami Fujiyoshi controls Yasumizu. The money and goods are split among the inhabitants, and I hear it really helps them get by. This was only done out of fear that Yasumizu could rebel again. Just so you know, Nosato don't approve of these. Only the Miguruma are fixated on it, and they're the top of the Fujiyoshis. Though the Haiguchi are in on it too. They believe that the trampling all over Yasumizu is the logical thing to do. What an incomprehensible bunch. So as far as you know, Nosato doesn't approve this tyranny. Yes, I can't deny that, as far as I know. I'm sorry, I need to make things clear. It confuses me. You said that the rebellion wasn't the result of superstition, but that means that if it's not certain if the mountain festival was caused by the rebellion either, also the festival and the feast are closely linked. You can see it in the methods and rules. Well, you mentioned that the divine sake was drunk in the feast as well. Are you sure it's not a coincidence? If they donate paper, writing tools, and rope, it would mean that at the least the Migurama knows about what happens in the feast. Well, at this point, I'm willing to say it's absolutely certainty. The Feast of the Yomi Purge is a severe crime committed by the head of the families to intimidate, control Yasumizu. I have an argument. You said that the feast involves monsters' doors that unlock themselves, and the supernatural punishment is a paranormal event. If you are certain that the head families are responsible, I would like a scientific explanation for all the strange events. That's easy. What? Before I get to that, though, I would like to ask you something. Can you show me the documents and writing collected in this mansion? I ended up being disappointed once. This house had a storage building, and there were archives there. There had been lots of documents left by Kiyono's Geishi, great-grandfather, and they had been sorted after he died. Thus, this was barely anything left, and the record storage was more just general storage. And so I insisted on taking a look, and now I was here. It really was just a place stuffed with various things. I guess there was no lie that this whole mansion really is just a place to stash things. Yes, but we do have people living here sometimes. Like who? The previous two heads of the family lived here. They retired. So your father too? Yes, he quickly grew senile and died of poisoning. That's true. When did this happen? 8 years ago. That's when the previous feast happened. What? Ah, oh yes, it happened after the mess. That was a feast back then. Yes, the official report that people died in the landslide at your construction site must have been a cover for that. Wait, are you saying that my father knew something and died because of it? It's possible, and that the fact that this mansion was used as a retirement home, the previous Nosato heads, I think we might find something here. If the Nosato really are against the control of the constructor in Fujiyoshi, that's even more likely. Let's look. If there is something here, it must be hidden. But the mansion is too large, and we don't even know what we will be looking for. I'm sure it must be something big. It has to be large enough for the previous heads to hide, right, and research. A secret room. I have a blueprint of the place. He found open it and we went around the mansion. There was nothing strange here. There was no empty spaces. I didn't see anything different than the actual building. Same went for the storage building. Isn't this a waste of time? No, it's a blueprint isn't fake in any way. There must be something in a place it doesn't cover. What do you mean? Let's check the basement of the storage building. I see if there's a secret room in the basement, it wouldn't affect the blueprints because it'd be the outside of their boundaries. Yes, the blueprint doesn't have to show false information, it just has to avoid showing it. But that will make the search even more difficult. Well, he was right on sifting through the mess there would take forever, but we could make it a lot easier if we focus on the floor and the walls. I'd left my bag in the prefab. I had no flashlight. I asked Nosato for something and he prepared an aged oil lamp. You have all sorts of things lying around, huh? There's probably a flashlight somewhere, but this suits the atmosphere, right? I knew exactly what he meant. It took us less than half an hour to find it. Of course, it wasn't something that looked like we were searching for it at the first glance. It did seem a bit unnatural. There was a palm-sized crow caved on a wooden surface below the motor wall. It was the symbol of the Nosato family. Is it a clue? Or some sort of mechanism? It's not just a carving. It's part of the parts are separate and movable. Buttons, so it's like a game. So he wasn't the only Nosato with strange hobbies, huh? I imagine it expects you to press them in order, but do you know any hints? The will of the crow. That had to be it. As a Nosato can open it easily, huh? Yes, we never repeat that teaching to anyone who isn't family. If it was made by my great-grandfather, then it must be a trap, too. Seriously? But it's no problem for you, is it? What was it again? Claw feather? Oh no, I'm not sure. Do you remember it? Hey. Claw eye beak. I'm pretty sure it was something like devour the claw eye beak. Really? Let's try it. He quickly pressed the button, as I told him. A moment later, a part of the wall turned 90 degrees. It opened a space through which an adult, though probably not Hashimoto-san, could pass. He liked this kind of thing, I assume. Oh, how embarrassing, but I can't help but feel excited myself. It must be in my blood. Don't worry, I feel you. We bantered nonchalantly, despite the dire situation. Once we made it inside, we had to pass through some hanging, dried herbs. What is this, St. John? Aren't you knowledgeable? It's just some herb to repel bugs, don't mind it. And it seems you were right. It's a study. It's tight in here, but the length is good. Let's see what we can find. I hope we have records made by the previous heads. I found a diary. Already? Let me look. We started looking around. Like we expected, the deck diary had writings left by all the previous heads of the Nosato family. It began with the great-grandfather, and the others added more after their retirement. All of them had strange handwriting, and according to what Kiyanosuke could make out, it was highly detailed documents and had references to the other texts here. You could really tell it belonged to a family of scholars. The index on the diary referenced the documents all over the room, and the diary itself was like a description of what was on behind the scenes. Kinosuke's great-grandfather was a genius who gathered immense wealth, but also a madman who threw it all away. His writings were specifically difficult to read, analyze, and understand. However, the feeling behind it couldn't be more obvious. It was anguish at the fact that he found a rational solution and began to doubt the superstitions. The preamble went like this: "Why do we submit to great Lord Sinai? Outsiders would see our beliefs as pure madness. Even so, we take the passion we should direct to our parents and children, and instead dedicate it to our faith. That alone would not mean much, but when you see it at the shadow of the great Lord Sinai over our daily lives, we become fearful and absolutely loyal to him, like well-trained dogs. The slavery of the mind will still shackle us when the era of enlightenment reaches our home. That is why I have decided to take up the wheel of the crow. I was so neglected and began my research. I hope that it bears fruit and mankind, not God, benefits from it, breaking free of the centuries of ignorance." This was written by Kinosuke's great-grandfather shortly after his role as head was passed down, when he was still in his healthy 40s. Upon reading this, Kinosuke looked conflicted. The great-grandfather he thought to be a madman was actually reasonable and intelligent. I also had something to think about. He challenged God. That absurd endeavor might have been the reason why he'd gone mad. The diary had 3 sections. In the first one, the great-grandfather tried to pinpoint the origins of Fujiyoshi. He wanted to find the invisible chains binding him by looking at where they started. However, this was difficult. Trying to find documents in Fujiyoshi would attach the attention of other families. Who and when then obstructed his work? Our legend says that we were protected by Shinai Shama. By looking for proof claiming otherwise, we would be betraying his compassion. It was also a time when not everyone went to school and literacy levels were really low. However, there were no record of one of them trying to check another's family's records. Thus, he looked at the historical documents from outside. The settlement began such a strange place, he figured that there would be many records about it. It's completely right. There were lots of old writings in the nearby village and towns. As it was wartime and the economic was dire, the paper was about to be wasted on fixing sliding. He used his own funds to acquire these precious documents. They were now organized and placed somewhere in the room. He was able to locate Fujiyoshi's roots. It happened 600 years ago during the Muromachi period, a bit before Sengoku. According to the documents, the place now known as Kamifujiyoshi began as a hunter settlement. This place was a hunting ground for centuries. Game meat had only spread among the people during the Meiji period, but the country folk had been eating it long before that. At first it was just a settlement of cabins for the hunters to rest and shelter, place the skin, and prepare meat. But once the people realized how rich the area was in game, they began colonizing the place. As a result, a part of Kamifujiyoshi was born, and the people began living here as either farmers or hunters. The settlement had no name yet. However, these extremely old documents referred it to as the Okami village. Not Okami or Okami-sama, though, but Okami, as in wolves. Apparently, this place really had wolves before. Not mountain dogs or badgers, but actual wolves. That was no secret, though. Shinai's shrine, ran by the Migoro-ama, had actually wolf bones in it. However, according to the documents, during the settlement development, the place was often attacked by wolves that caused major damage. They had probably tried many things to deal with them, but the documents wrote down one very simple method. The people of the wolf village prepared a human sacrifice and consigned them to flame. Human sacrifice. It was a practice that had existed in Japan for a long time. During construction or whatnot, people would be killed or buried as an offering to prevent misfortune. I heard of human sacrifices made to prevent bridges being taken away by floods or people buried during castle fortification. It's a pretty big deal. Still, it wasn't weird to do it to prevent a beast-related problem. It did seem like a plausible story, so I wasn't surprised. Neither of us were specialists, but from what I knew, people tried to benefit from sacrifices by later on worshipping them as gods. I'd even heard that the pillar kanji used to count gods were based on the term of human sacrifice. In a way, following the sacrifice, the beast attack subsided and the settlement continued to grow. At this point, the upper settlement, once known as the Okami village, now Kami Fujiyoshi, was surrounded by cabins and other settlements. Through irrigation, these settlements gathered water from the wolf village. One of these settlements was a dangerous place that was often covered in mist that led people to their deaths, and for some reason the locals found it really important. Kiyonosuke Shi has great-grandfather, and myself figured that it had to be Yasumizu. And if they took water from Kami Fujiyoshi, it wasn't hard to imagine that the heirs, the royals, relationship between the settlements had already existed then. In agriculture societies, the settlements that controlled by the supply of water were extremely influential. After all, they had stopped the flow. The settlements would dry out. It was even related to Yasumizu's rebellion that Kiyonosuke Shi told me about. I couldn't ignore this point, though there was no mention of Yasumizu or the local superstitions yet. All that the document said was the wolf village was steadily progressing as a settlement. However, there was a mention of some fearsome beast yokai, god that ate people. It was only mentioned in the oldest documents, then never heard from again. A god, a powerless god, that's not enough. The legends don't say anything about... Wait. The badger. Do you hate that name?
こうして信頼明神の印をつけて畜生どもの頭目として振る舞っておる我にこそふさわしい。どうせなら我十里四方のケチな領地じゃが退屈はさせませぬぞ。
It had to be God. She said that she was defeated by Great Lord Shinai, but never mentioned when it happened.
神の武士は示す編。実際に給仕は神だし、つまりこれは狼。
I was close to the truth, but for now, back to the history. Fujiyoshi had started out as your typical hunting and farming settlement. Things changed after a century when life in the settlement had finally stabilized. At this point, the records left by the outsiders started nothing that there was a strange village in the mountains. The sources had stated to become many and varied too. I was curious about how the great grandfather got documents from Kyoto and Tohoku. But in a way, these reports were records written by travelers who stopped here. Many of them were interested in the local customs. One was their hate for mountain fires. It was so bad that outsiders weren't allowed to make any flames, and they themselves had a special watering hole where they did. One of their warships of a humanoid wolf statue. They asked it was for good fortune in the hunt and a peaceful life in the mountains. One was the special misty place where travelers were summoned and welcomed by sensual women. Some rumors mentioned seemed hardly believable, but some of them were still alive, and I was surprised to see how old they were. What bothered me was the fact that there were many records of the invitation of the misty place, but nothing about getting killed there. In fact, most of them mentioned eating good meat and veggies and drinking good steak while having fun with their beautiful girls. It was safe to assume that the Feast of the Yomi Perch hadn't existed back then. It was closer to the traditional treatment of guests as described by Rick Echoes. By the way, you seem pretty hung up on guests. Is there some sort of local culture related to that?
はい。そもそもかつての藤吉は狩りの安全の祈願のため遠方の狩人を村人はマロードと呼び手厚くもてなしたと言います。
However, there was one thing she seemed to be wrong about. The strange village in the records was a completely different place than the one built around Shinai's shrine she spoke of. In fact, there wasn't a single method of the Shinai at this point. The general area here was marked as Kachihara. Would things change if we continue further? Anyway, we kept reading. Such records continued for 2 to 3 decades, and then there was a period where there wasn't recorded at all. Apparently, the travelers who made their way to the area started being chased out. The settlement suddenly became isolated. Without any documents from the village itself, it was hard to know exactly what happened. But according to Nosato's documents, this time period was how far they could trace their lineage back. After that, the settlements showed up the documents in another century later. It was the middle of the Edo period, peaceful times, and the amount of records appeared to have exploded, along with the name Shinai. There is a hidden mountain where the people worship a wolf-faced god and prosper because of it. It is said that the hunters who do not pay their respects to him get lost and injured in the mountains. It is a spiritual place that a mountain Aztec should visit at least once. Their prayers seem to heal all. There are oracles who can predict the future with great accuracy. The non-believers who step on the mountain are in for a terrible fate. The name of the god they worship is Shinai. The village is called Fujiyoshi. So that's it. I lurked forward and shouted with excitement. True, I did hear that this village was once called Fashiyoshi, but what's so important about that? It's the same trick with the Shinai-san. When you take apart the kanji Shinai into, you can arrange them into Okami, great god, which is also photogenic, identical to wolf. Oh, you're right. Hey, wait, you mean this is the same? Look at the Fujiyoshi. The first kanji contains the radical for dog, covers the animal radical that is used on the left. Keeping that in mind, line up with the Yoshi, the Fujiyoshi to get it. If you broke apart the first kanji, you get person, dog, and good. Then by combining the latter two kanjis into one unum again, you got Hito Akami, or werewolf. Werewolf. Hito Akami. Does that refer to the Okami-sama, or Great Lord Shinai? The two of them are essentially the same. One takes the form of the peaceful great god, Great Lord Shinai, while the other takes the form of the resentful Okami. They both take the shape of the 3 werewolves, but do different things. I can't really blame people for seeing them as the same. Let's not forget that we have documents saying that there was a culture here that worshipped werewolves at least a century ago. They probably had some beast attacks and started holding human sacrifice and built a primitive faith around werewolves. As a time passed, that evolved into Shinai-sama. Okami-sama is a divinity born during one of those stages, and to the people of that era, they were the same. The villagers of Fujiyoshi no, the Fusashi Yoshi were fully aware of their religion, particularly, and even hid that in their own village name. Why did they hide it in the first place? You're right, let's move on. The great-grandfather seemed to have noticed these hidden words too. The reports followed generally described Fujiyoshi as it was, though strange practices were not considered rituals, and the prosper as a cult village. It was the mountain village, far from the rest of the civilization, yet it prospered through the money left behind by guests who made the trip regardless. There were now the two types of guests here: the ones who visited the place to hunt and the ones that came for religious reasons. The writings from the later dates included lots of those left by monks. All of them were surprised by the strange faith and legend Fujiyoshi and praised the strength of their belief. Some wrote about the faith in detail. Many of them clearly named the 4 head families and the legend about the 5 guardians. The hunters, however, didn't leave many writings, or rather it wasn't even their writings. Besides a couple of reports by local great lords, someone hunting down large beasts. There were also those that simply mentioned men who went hunting and never returned. One of them clearly stated, "Do not hunt in Fujiyoshi in the summer. The people of Fujiyoshi speak of the curse of the Yasumizu." I see. Fujiyoshi had changed lots over in a century. Yes, it's fair to assume that all the local names and stories were created during this time. Yasumizu seemed to be leaving a different impression too. The hunters who visited the place don't come back. The feast of the Yomi Purge had began. The history continued. After a while of prosperity due to its Shinai occult, Fujiyoshi began the comes from Meiji. The new government centralized power, royal areas began to develop, and religious reforms established Shinto as the state religion. The anti-Buddhist movement of the era planned a complete separation of Shinto and Buddhism, destroying many Buddhist temples, customs, and cultural assets, dealing another blow to the village and its faith. This could easily be found in the Nasato's records, but it was admitted here that the Usumatsus were particularly damaging for them, and that there was no denying that the Usumatsu's culture seemed Buddhist in nature, and the prostitution part must have had them targets of harsh prejudice. The Shinai faith, in which many strange rituals had to either cease or discard them, turn them into something more culturally acceptable. However, they did keep a few of them. Before moving on to the next chapter, we put together the region names of Fujiyoshi, which the great-grandfather rediscovered from the archives. According to him, Fujiyoshi had several districts, each one under the jurisdiction of the village head. The Miguru-rama had Fushigi, where the Shinai shrine was built. The Haiguchi had Hoshizuki, where people gathered. The Nosato had Tomeguchi, the medical plant field right beside Kageogawa. And the last, the Umatsus, were given the Hacho, the lodging area. According to Kiyonosuke, these regions remained in Kami Fujiyoshi. to this day. In fact, the names of these regions had existed from the era when the name Fujiyoshi began to spread to the outside, and as was the designation of Kami Fujiyoshi. And on the other hand, places aside from Kami Fujiyoshi had already been clearly identified and named, such as the Yasumizu. Not Yasumizu spelled it the kanji for rest and water, but rather rest and lord. I see my great-grandfather reached the same conclusion as us. If you swap the kanji for fushaki around and combine them in the one for hair and hasuzuki for the same trick, then combine them for liver, Kagekawa was originally written, but the first kanji on top of the later, and you get bone. Tomeguchi is a no-brainer, but Gucci as the tome and foot. With you replace the second between the first one and you get claw. The religion's names started with Kami Fujiyoshi were divided up and based on body parts. And thus we get the real spelling of Yasumizu. Break the first kanji down and you're left with the person, tree, and lord. And put it together and you get human sacrifice. His great-grandfather seemed to have no clue about the purpose of the names. However, he did guess that the oldest one was Fujiyoshi or Yasumizu. He concluded the link between those names and the words werewolf and the human sacrifice was related. There was another thing here. I guess that Kami Fujiyoshi was named at their body parts to represent a single human. Another guess was that by burying the settlement in the name instead of burying people in the ground, they avoided killing their own. Honestly, it seemed to me like we didn't have enough to understand the true intentions behind this. Though the fact that they had words, human sacrifice, and Yasumizu was pretty shady, you could assume that it was named because it was a human sacrifice meant to help the area. Or perhaps it was related to the human sacrifice from the origin of the village. Regardless, there were definitely alternate motives behind the names. Fujiyoshi and Yasumizu had become Fujiyoshi and Yasumizu during the Meiji period and became of a single area. The great-grandfather concluded that the naming was based on a local conventions and that it was meant to hide the village's past. He had nowhere to continue from here. The next section was stated out by Kiyonosuke, his great-grandfather, but after his writing grew worse and worse, finally stopped, his son took over. According to Kiyonosuke, his great-grandfather had gotten a mental illness and began acting eccentric. He'd seen it in his own eyes. The final reasonable bit of writing left behind him cursed his deteriorating mind and hoped that his descent would take over his research. His wish was fulfilled when Kiyonosuke's great-grandfather found this room and took over. This section was primarily made to give detailed descriptions to the outdated rites and customs of Fujiyoshi. Naturally, the lack of historical accounts was a hindrance. However, the documents owned by the Nosato family and the knowledge he gained as the head made it possible to do it. He was also married to someone with the ties of the Migurama, so he also gained access to some of their documents. Having gathered info from various sources, he reached some reliable conclusions. Those efforts to gather information had made him the target of the other head families. His mind also seemed to be deteriorated. During his twilight years, the final bits of writing in the diary seemed to scream his fear of death. He died on May 1st, 15 years ago. The text here made it evident that he died in the feast of the Yomi Purge. As the hands of the supernatural looms over us and takes our lives, I realized that I was losing control of my mind. Now that I have seen this might of God, I was invigorated what duty to do, what I had to continue the previous head's research into our homeland of Fujiyoshi. I probably will be hanged tomorrow, and in all honesty, it seemed like a favorable outcome at this point. What if the irresistible urge to sleep faded and I opened my eyes to see the wolf god's face? I would unable to bear the fear. The wolf bane I shall use to end my life lies in my hand. And that was it. Kiyosuke's voice was shaking. From what he said, his grandfather was an intelligent man that he knew personally and respected immensely. The text here could sum up as thus. Fujiyoshi had several strange rites and customs. When combined with one's unique to specify head families, the numbers grew exponentially. It felt that all the details about these things even had info, and we really didn't care about right now. The content about Usamatsu was particularly harsh, and even though it was noted that not everything was here, info about Migururama, however, was extremely limited. However, it was said that horrible screams could be heard from their storage.
あの日、私はいたずら心で三の蔵の地下決して入っちゃいけないと言われた。そして
It was morbidly interesting read, but there was only one thing that mattered to us, is the custom of the lynching. It was basically describing the feast of the Yomi Purge. Yokami-sama would return from Yomi to get revenge for being killed. There were two notable points here. One was that it had apparently began about 5 years ago after the village closed itself from the world, and the other was that Kami Fujiyoshi was mostly uninvolved in the feast. Kiyosuke's great-grandfather examined the feast's origins from various angles. He investigated the stones, the hanging pine tree graveyard, and looked at the records of Kami Fujiyoshi's mansion, and concluded that Kami Fujiyoshi were making the graves. According to the mansion, the Okiba were placed in the Yasumi Zoo at this time too. 500 years of history was enough to make it historical landmark, but there were no megaliths from the millennia BCE. They were simply put there to help them turn the village into Great Lord Shinai's worshipping holy ground. The words left behind the elders of Kami Fujiyoshi Yasumi Zoo gave us even more info. And there was a legend that in a time when samurai still existed, Yomi Beto poured out of the Yasumi Zoo and attacked Kami Fujiyoshi. That coincided with the rebellion Kiyosuke had mentioned, and the reason why the head families oppressed. Looking at both documents and the words of mouth and the rebellion and what happened 5 years ago, or 5 centuries ago, shortly before the village became isolated. In Yasumizu, Yomi Beto were said to be scary creatures completely covered in blood water. You could find the word blood water by playing with the kanji in the name Saranaga. Bloodwater Rapids, the stream, was considered corrupted even half a millennium ago. Anyways, through the legend was warped by superstition. There is no denying that Kami Fujiyoshi was attacked by people covered in the Saranaga mud. The great-grandfather concluded without a doubt that the incident was what was made by Kami Fujiyoshi's people so afraid of Yasumizu. This rebellion was the very cause of the decades of isolation, the creation of Shinai's faith, and the start of the feast of the Yomi Purge. As for what it meant, it was all planned for the purpose of holding the already discriminated Yasumizu down and preventing further rebellion. The great-grandfather thought that Yasumizu was purposely created to be discriminated against. It was a bad, dangerous place to live in. The reason why it wasn't abandoned wasn't mentioned here, but in a way people continue to call it home. In governing intentionally, creating a lower class and treating them poorly satisfied the upper class and thus made it their governance easier. It was something you saw all over around the world. Even in Japan, there was a complicated historical discrimination that left it mark even in the current era. Thus, the presence of a settlement meant to be looked down upon was good for the leaders of that era. However, they didn't want any more rebellions, so could they stop it? One was to make them fight amongst themselves. Another was to make them so superstitious they wouldn't even think of rebellion. Basically, they had to make them believe the lie that there were wolves among them, and who were killing people, causing them to kill each other. By doing that, they would sap any strength Yasumitsu needed to rebel. They also prepared a background story to make them believe that the abnormality was actually real. The great-grandfather guessed that this was the true purpose of the 5-century-old religion. His sources for that was the documents gathered by his predecessors, which claimed that people from the local temples and shrines were called into the village. He assumed that the incomplete, complete, and intentionally destroyed records were those regarding the scholars they summoned to help create their religion. It seemed absurd at first, but after thinking about it, it was entirely reasonable. The settlement they looked down upon had bared their fangs at them, so what did they do? Call the smart people for help. That was natural. Now with the feast's origins revealed, what was that about the head families not being involved in it so much? Apparently the first feasts were a lot simpler than the current one. There was purification, sheltering, dreaming, and the limit of one per day. No actual punishments, breaking the laws. They probably set it up to prevent indiscriminate massacres. Also, there was no wolf selection, and there were no guardians. The heads, Fujiyoshi's leaders at that time, only circulated the Yasumizu legend the wolves came back. By spreading the local legend with a lie, they motivated the people to kill each other whenever the mist appeared. It's successful, and the people started killing suspected wolves every time the mist showed up. In response to that, those who spread the suspicion were brutalized that night. This weekend, Yasumizu left the place a breeding ground for future problems. It was too weak to rebel. Wait, that doesn't make sense. Why would they kill each other just because of that? How can there be murders without any real threat? The past isn't the present. There are times where superstition could make people murder one another. Your great-grandfather uses the word lynch right from the start. I think that the feast of the Yomi Purge was actually useful to the people of Yasumizu. What do you mean? Let's keep reading. Sure enough, the great-grandfather seemed to believe that the people of Yasumizu, the feast made the killings into a just cause. And with everything that we have done and read, I think we'll continue next time. We'll see how this was helpful to Yasumizu. And if you like the content, like, comment, subscribe, and thanks for watching, and we'll continue in the next one.